Okay. Hello. Good to see you. Good evening, good afternoon, goodbye, good hello, good God, I don't know what's going on. Nice to see you. I'm a bit confused. Just got back from driving over the hill. When we say over the hill here, we live on the coast side, and then there's some hills, and then there's the other side, which is a large part of which is Silicon Valley, and then there's the bay. So to get from Santa Cruz side to the Silicon Valley side, you have to drive over the hill. So it takes about an hour to get to pretty much anywhere you want to go. And that's what I've just been doing since I had to go and work with my brothers as we are preparing our musical tribute to the previous generation, as I think I may have mentioned at some point. If not, I mentioned it last night. So anyway, that's what we're doing. It's my parents' belated 60th wedding anniversary in another month. Belated because it's actually their 61st anniversary, but we had to skip the original one, the proper one, because of the pandemic. So we are now putting together a belated 60th on their 61st wedding anniversary, and my brothers and I are going to play some music. So that's what I've been working on, and that's what I just came back from. So all that said, very nice to see you, and don't have a whole lot of other news of any kind. I mentioned briefly last night that our small dog, we're down to 2 dogs now, of course, so we have large dog and small dog. Small dog Walter had to go to the vet and stay overnight because he was having seizures that he couldn't get out of. So now we're going to put him on phenobarbital. But other than that, nothing serious has happened this week, and Walter seems much better and fine. So we're all healthy. Young people are healthy. The old people, well, myself and my perennially young wife, I should say, we are all fine. We are obviously taking it careful and slow because of the pandemic still going on. But other than that, nothing much to report. I'm working on my various projects, shuttling back and forth between 2 halves of the same book, although in completely different stages of production. So one, I'm trying to nail down the final details, the little edits and stuff. And the other one, I still have things I haven't written at all yet. So I'm cycling back and forth between those. I think that's about it, though, however, in terms of anything useful to talk about. Since I don't have anything useful to talk about, I will just check in and say hello to everybody who has signed in. As Emily put it, my romper room hello. So who do we have? We have Kenneth. Hello, Kenneth. Good to see you. Kelly. Good evening, Kelly. Nice to have you aboard. And there's Emily. Hello, Tad and friends, Emily says. Ready to wave from my romper room hello. Mirror, mirror, tell me today, have all my friends had fun at play? I see. And then, she Miss Nancy or whoever the Miss was when you people were watching it. Actually, I found out once I was an older kid, I found out that the Miss Nancy that I had grown up with was actually only one of many Miss Nancys. And I was shocked and disappointed to learn that. Not all the Nancy, that was not the only Nancy who was saying hello to me. That was just my local Nancy. Anyway, enough of that. So, Emily, hello, yes, and that's your official Romper Room hello. So, Jim, hello, yes, you do get a birthday tab reading, and I will be doing it shortly, which is not a reference to my height. I'm proudly average. Becca, hello. Barb Ann, hello. Tim, hello. I hope everyone is doing well. Yes, I also hope so. Mahmoud, good to see you, buddy. Good to see you. Hello to you too. Jerry, hello, Mr. Unangst. How are you? Your cat is currently trying to get you to leave your computer. They are Luddites, those cats. Just absolutely Luddites. Nancy, hi, Tad, she says. Hey, Tad, how's it going? It is going well. Under the circumstances, I'm getting work done, and I still don't know if I'm going to finish everything as soon as I would like to get everything finished. But unlike some people, I'm pretty much, this is all I do, is just work. So, except for lately, I've been playing some music with my brothers. But because of that, I will eventually get all of this work done. So that's all I have to say. I'm doing fine. Medardo, hello. Hello, Medardo says hello. And, and he was proselytizing. You were proselytizing for the Dragonbone chair. Well, thank you very much. Much appreciated. Your favorite author, if that's me, is doing fine. I would never assume that's who you meant, just because you asked it on my live reading. Because you might be saying, and how is my favorite author, Patrick Rothfuss, doing today? And then I'd have to say, well, I haven't talked to Pat lately, but I assume he's doing okay. But if you're talking about me, I'm doing very well. Thank you. Got to spend the day with some of my family who are uniformly excellent people. And we made some music together, and I'm learning more about bluegrass than I knew before, since I'm not really a bluegrass player. I'm more a rock and roll kind of a guy. And whereas both my brothers know quite a bit about bluegrass and have been playing it for years, and since that's kind of the format we're using here, I am adapting. Claudia, hello, good to see you. And Jim, yes, everyone is doing well. Kristen, hello, Kristen. Oh, I'm glad you found perhaps a solution. I hope this makes it easier for you. Carl, good to see you. James D. Scott, good day. Good day. It's a neighborhood in Sydney. Ah, okay. Did I ever tell you, by the way, James just mentioned Calliope Skuros, and that Rush Cutters Bay seems the kind of place that a Calliope Skuros might hang out. One of my favorite things that happened, this is an Otherland reference for those of you who don't know Otherland, but if I explain it any more than that, it'll spoil the story. One of my favorite all-time letters I ever got from a reader said, I don't often feel like I see myself being represented in fiction, but my kind of person, my life, my stuff, I just don't see it, and I don't really feel represented in fiction. But since your Calliope Skuros is a Greco-Australian lesbian police detective, and I am a Greco-Australian lesbian police detective, I finally feel like someone has seen me and has given me, I don't remember how she phrased it, but somebody has put a character that I identify with in a book, and I went, yeah, I hit that one pretty well. So anyway, Calliope was always one of my favorites in that book, and when I get around to writing my next Otherland book, which I will one of these days, I'm definitely going to have a part in it for Calliope. As a matter of fact, she's going to be a fairly major player, so more so even than she was in the first Otherland books. So anyway, g'day, James. And now I know where Rush Cutters Bay is. And I love Sydney, by the way. I've been there 2, 3, 4 times. Can't remember exactly, but I love Sydney. I think it's one of the most beautiful cities in the world. Cliff, hello, good to see you. Technically later today. Yeah, it is technically a lot later than it was last night. But I have slept a bit between those two. So, Local Nancy. Yeah, that is a good name, Emily. You're absolutely right. Jeremy, hello. You ushered for Palo Alto Players today. Ah, excellent. Okay, Palo Alto Players is one of our local theater companies. And although I don't know if I ever did a Palo Alto Players show, I've done pretty much every other amateur theater in Palo Alto area. But Palo Alto Players was also right in the same complex where the theaters that I was involved in, the Children's Theater and the Youth Workshop, were both located. So I've had a lot of shared experience with Palo Alto Players. Not that anybody cares but me and Jeremy, but there you go. Alan, David Clark, of course you can join me. Of course, you can join us all. This is a bunch of really nice people, and you will enjoy them, and they will enjoy you. So join and enjoy. Claudia, hello, Claudia. Good to see you. Day 6 of the nationwide lockdown here. So, oh yeah, that's right. Oh yeah, I now I remember. Well, I'm sorry to hear about the lockdown, but on the other hand, it's probably all for a good cause. So, I mean, in the sense of not having things go wrong. And New Zealand's been really smart about their lockdown. So I hope it was the right decision, and I cross my fingers. Let me see who else have we got that I haven't said. Yara, hello, Yara, welcome back. I'm sorry to hear about a bad doctor visit, but yeah, please feel free to hang out with us, and we're glad to have you. And there's Sally. Hello, Sally. Good to see you too. And with that, I think we've caught up with everybody, and I can get to the reading in just a moment. I'm guessing from the way it feels that my voice will hold up. I have been singing all day today, but fortunately, having sung for years, I don't blow out on just an evening of or an afternoon's worth of singing. So I think my voice will last, although I may get a bit raspy and coughish and things like that on some of the less mellifluous character voices. So anyway, the last thing that happened was that we were with Quinniton, who has escaped from the seclusion, which is basically the harem for the autarch of Zand. And she and Pigeon, the mute slave boy, mute and I believe also eunuch slave boy, have escaped to the ship that Jedine had told them to go to meet him when Jedine thought that he might be able to escape with Quinniton, the bride of the autarch. And that's where we stopped. As a matter of fact, Quinniton had just sort of fainted. We were told to expect you, although dressed as a woman, not as a boy slave, said Aximus Dorza, captain of the Morning Star. He had brought her to the small ship's tiny cabin. A boy named Pigeon crouched at Quinniton's feet, silent and wide-eyed. We were even told that we might need to take you with us on short notice. Now he waved the forged letter she'd written in Luyan's chamber and closed with Jedine's seal. We were not told we would leave without Lord Jedine himself on board. What do you know about this? She breathed a silent prayer of thanks to the hive and the sacred protection of her beloved bees. Apparently, the sailors had not heard of Jedine's arrest. Now it was time to use the skills of deceit she had been forced to learn in the seclusion. I don't know, Captain. I only know that Jedine told me to disguise myself and bring this slave here and to give you this message. It was important, she reminded herself, not to know what Jedine's purported letter said. I know nothing else, I'm afraid. I am only glad we found you before that man who was chasing us did, whatever he planned to do. She did her best to sound like a queen, regal and sure of herself. But I am a queen, aren't I? At least of a sort. Or I was. But it had never felt that way, not for a moment. The captain waved away the unimportant detail of their pursuer. The docks are full of unnatural scum like that, and others even worse, believe me. No, what I do not understand is why we should leave without Lord Jeddy. I ask you again, do you know anything of this? She shook her head. Only that Lord Jedding told me to come to you and go where you carried me, that you and your men would protect me from his enemies. She took a deep, shuddering breath, glad that she had every excuse for anxiousness. Please, Captain, tell me what my lord says. Maximus Dorza picked up the letter in his thick fingers and squinted. His eyes were so netted in wrinkles that from the nose up he looked to be a great-grandfather's age, but she guessed he was considerably younger. It says only, take Lady Quiniton to Hyrosol. All other plans must wait. Take her there tonight, and I will meet you there. But meet us where, my lady? Hyrosol is only a little smaller than Great Zes itself. And why cross the ocean to Ion, instead of merely shipping to another port down the coast and waiting for him there? I do not know, Captain. She suddenly felt as if she might tumble to the floor again in exhaustion. You must do as you see fit. I put myself and my servant in your hands, as my Lord Jedding wished. The captain frowned and stared at the seal ring that he held in his other hand. You have his seal, as well as the letter. How can I doubt you? Still, it is strange, and the men will be restless when they hear. The palace is an unsettled place just now, she said with as much quiet meaning as she could muster. Perhaps your men will be happy to find themselves away from Great Zis for a little while. Dorza gave her a hard stare. Do you say there's trouble in the palace? Is our lord involved somehow? She had baited the hook. It would not do to pull up the line too hard. I have no more to say, Captain. To the wise, a single word is as good as a poem. He went out then. Quiniton fell back on the narrow bed, unable even to find the strength to protest, when Pigeon curled up on the hard floor, as though he really were her slave. Out of the confusion in her own head, she suddenly heard the Oracle Mudri's voice. Remember who you are, and when the cage is open, you must fly. It will not be opened twice. So was this what the old woman had meant? Quiniton couldn't think any more. She was too weary. I am flying, Mother Mudri. At least I'm trying to fly. Within a few breaths, she was asleep. She woke for just a few short moments. Above her head, bare feet thumped on the planks, and voices rose, shouting instructions and singing songs of the hard sea life as the sailors of the Morning Star of Kyros prepared to journey to Hyrosol. Chapter 39, Winter's Eve. Dancing for winter. Dust, dust. Ice, ice. She wears the bones for eyes. She waits until the singing stops. From the Bonefall Oracles. Puzzle was in surprisingly fine voice, a slight quaver the only thing to betray the passage of so many years. Otherwise, Bryony might have thought time had turned tail, that she was again a little girl sitting on her father's lap, the wind plucking in angry frustration at the roofs outside, while they all sat, safe and warm, in the great dining hall. But those days were gone, she reminded herself. Nothing would bring them back. And if time had really lost the battle, it could be that soon no one alive would even remember those times. Puzzle strummed his lute. continuing with a long, sad story of Prince Kalor and the ever-wounded maid. And I'm not going to try to sing this because I don't remember if I ever had a melody to it. Then did he first glimpse her, the bleeding maid, the old jester crooned, telling of the knight's entrance into the siege of always winter. He thought her sore hurt, even dead, and his noble heart did quail with woe to think that such a bloom must fade, before e'er it had been tasted by kiss or figured by art. But then opened she her eyes, and as she saw him there, smiled, though her beauteous face was wan and sad, a pearl displayed upon the cushions of her golden hair, and he thought no empress of the south could match the loveliness she had. Then Kalor's heart flew like an unhooded hawk straight to her breast, although the troubled knight did not know whether he were cursed or blessed. She had to admit she was surprised, not so much to find that Puzzle could still sing, but by the grace of Matty Tinwright's words. The young poet sat at the end of one of the front tables, near Puzzle's stool, looking as though he knew he had actually done something worthwhile. It was certainly a change from his dreadful, lugubrious paeans of praise to her, his comparisons of her to a virgin deity full of aching stretches for rhymes. There were not many things that rhymed with Zoria, merciful, or goddess, after all. She was impressed and even pleased. She had given Tinwright a commission as much to irritate Barrack and amuse herself as anything else, but perhaps he would eventually prove a true poet after all. Unless, she suddenly thought, he has stolen the whole thing from some obscure source. No, it was Winter's Eve. She would be charitable. She would even say something nice to him, although nothing so fulsome as to fetch him puppy-dogging after her all evening. Thus, instanter, Kalor pledged himself her slave, declared that by her token whole worlds would he throw down. Yet she only shook her fair head, and a reproachful look him gave, and raised her hands, white arms reaching from bloody sleeved gown. Then said she, "Good night. Worlds shall not woo me, nor words, but only and you free me from this wound that steals my life. Shall I be yours? 1 year gone I spurned haughty raven, prince of birds, and he did my breast pierce with his terrible slow knife. All of the physic of my father's court cannot staunch or even slow the wound that dire blade to me gave, nor stop this crimson flow." Bryony even smiled at Puzzle, who barely noticed. He was enjoying this moment of attention so much that he seemed to forget it was the royal family to whom he owed his position, not the courtiers, who considered the old man a rather tiresome jest. Still, he was the center of all eyes, or should have been, and he clearly reveled in it. The rest of the assembled nobility seemed strange to Bryony. Conversation was awkward, many whispering, others speaking too loudly, even after an evening's indulgence. The Ptolleys and their allies had made it clear they considered the feast as an insult to Galen's memory, and had not appeared. Thus there had been even more drinking than would be expected on Winter's Eve, mulled wine being sluiced down throats, as though many of those present expected the worst, and expected it soon. For gossip about the possible fate of Southmarch's army had sped through the castle all evening, tales of terror and defeat flying to every corner like little white moths rushing out of a long-closed wardrobe. Bryony herself had needed to soothe Rose and Moina, both in tears, who were certain that they would be ravished by monsters. Yes, and they were certain that Gowett and his Hyrosol men would ravish them as well, Bryony thought sourly, on that night, and precious little help they were to me or anyone else. She shied away from any more thoughts of Kendrick's death. Let her mind instead hold the memory of Dowett Danfar. Surrounded by red-faced, red-flushed, drunken faces, she found herself longing for his company. Not in a romantic way. She looked around as though even the thought might have been obvious to those around her, but the nobles were busy licking suet pudding from their fingers and calling for more wine. No, it would have been a pleasure simply because of the quickness of his wit. There was no blurriness in Dowett, who seemed always sharp as a knife. She doubted he drank at all, and felt certain that even if he did, few had ever seen him the worse for it. Oh, by all the gods, what will we do? How will we save ourselves? It had been gnawing at her since she received Brone's news, and she couldn't keep it at bay any longer. She couldn't even bear to consider that anything might have happened to Beric, but had to accept the possibility that Tyne Aldrich and his army had failed. What then? How could she and her nobles plan for a siege against such a mysterious force? Thoughts turning round and round between those who were missing. She could not have imagined a winter's eve so friendless, so bereft of family, and the malevolent creatures who seemed now to be separated from her beloved Southmarch castle only by the narrow protection of the bay. Bryony suddenly remembered that she had promised she would see her stepmother, Anissa, tonight. Her first inclination was to send a servant to make her apologies, but as she looked around the room, at the sickly, over-cheerful faces of those who were still upright, at the ruin of the meal scattered down the tables, bones and shreds of skin and puddles of red wine like the remnants of some dreadful battle, she decided that she could think of nothing better than to walk for a time in the night air, and that a visit to her bed-bound stepmother, only days away from giving birth, would be the most acceptable excuse. Although it took some doing, she even managed to create in herself a small amount of sympathy for Anissa. If Bryony felt so helpless, with the reins of the kingdom in her hands, how much worse must it feel to be to her stepmother, big with child and forced to sift through the conflicting rumors that flittered into her tower. A smattering of lazy applause and a few drunken cheers caught her attention. The song had ended. Bryony was a little ashamed to realize she had missed most of it. "Very fine," she said out loud and clapped her hands. "Well sung! Good puzzle! One of the best entertainments we have had for many a year." The aged man beamed. "Serve him," she directed one of the pages. "For such splendid singing must be thirsty work." "I will not take all credit, Highness," Puzzle said as he held out his hand for the cup. I was assisted by Master Tinwright. Yes, you told us. And to him I also say, well done, sir. You have breathed new life into an old and beloved tale. She tried to remember how the story of the ever-wounded maid ended, hoping that Tinwright had not adopted some modern approach to the finish that she hadn't heard, which would make it embarrassingly clear that her mind had wandered. Like Calor, you have found the song that heals the Raven Prince's dreadful deed. She seemed to have got it right. Tinwright looked as though he wished he could throw himself before her and become her footstool. Yes, but he won't be able to find a rhyme for that either, she thought. It was hard to break old habits. She stood with a rustling of underskirts and said, I must go now and take the tidings of the new season to my stepmother, Queen Anissa. Those who could still do so levered themselves upright as well. Please, Bryony said, sit yourselves down. The feast is not ended. Servants, keep the wine flowing until I return, so our guests may celebrate the warmth that the orphan brought back. Remember, there is no season so dark that it does not see the sun come again. Gods protect me, she thought as she swished toward the door in her great hooped skirt. I'm beginning to talk like one of Tinwright's characters. Heron Millward, the young soldier from Sutler's Wall, was one of the 2 guards accompanying her tonight. The other was a slightly older fellow, dark-stubbled and taciturn. She remembered to wish them both good tidings for this night and tomorrow's holy day. The courtesy acted as a sort of hedge against being impatient at how slowly they walked, encumbered by armor and halberds. She had just crossed the outer courtyard and had almost reached Anice's residence in the Tower of Spring when a figure stepped out of the shadows in front of her. Her heart slithered up into her throat, and she only recognized the apparition one thin moment before young Millward shoved the spiked head of his halberd into the intruder's guts. "Stop! Guard!" she cried. "Chavin? Merciful Zoria, what are you doing? You could have been killed. And where have you been?" The physician looked startled and even shamefaced as he stared down at the sharp pike wavering in front of his belly. When he lifted his gaze to Bryony's, she saw that he was pale and puffy, blue circled beneath the eyes, and that he had not put a razor to his beard for days. "My apologies for frightening you, Princess," he said, "although it would have been worse for me than for you, it seems." As great a relief as it was to see him, she was not prepared to forget her anger. "Where have you been? Merciful Zoria, do you know how many times in these latest days I wanted desperately to talk to you? You have always been our advisor as well as our doctor. Where did you go?" "That is a long story, Highness, and not one for a cold and windy courtyard, but I will tell you all the tale soon. We are at war, Javen. The Twilight people are on our doorstep, and you simply disappeared." She felt her eyes fill with tears and wiped angrily with her sleeve. "Barrack is gone too, fighting those creatures. And there are worse things, things you do not know. May all the gods confound you, Chavin! Where have you been?" He shook his head slowly. "I deserve that curse, but largely because I have been foolish. I have been hard at work trying to solve a dire riddle. More than one, to be honest. And it all has taken longer than I guessed it would. Yes, I know about the Twilight people and about Barrack. I was absent from the court, but not from gossip, which travels everywhere." She threw her hands up in exasperation. "Riddles! There are already too many riddles. In any case, I am going now to see my stepmother. I must do that before we can talk." "Yes, I know that too. And I think I should accompany you. She is close to her time, and that is another reason I should come." She waved at the guards to lower their weapons. "Come along, then. I will drink a posset with her, then we will go." "It may not be so swift, Highness," Chavin suggested. Bryony did not have the patience on this long, woeful night to try to work out what he meant. There seemed no proper way, Chert reflected, to prepare yourself to die. But it also seemed as though this was the second or third time in the last few days he had been forced to try. "I don't want to," he said quietly. The armored, yellow-eyed shapes looked down at him without a glimmer of emotion, their spear points a ring of dull gleams in the grayish light. But the strange man beside him stirred. "Of course not," Gil said. "All that live cling to life. Even, I think, my own people." Chert bowed his head, thinking of Opal and the boy. How little all this meant, how foolish and unnatural it was, compared to his life with them. There was a rising patter that for a moment he felt certain was his own racing heart. Then he recognized the sound and looked up, not in hope, but instead almost in annoyance that the horrible waiting would continue. The man, if it was a man, rode one of the largest horses Chert had ever seen. The top of his own head would barely reach its knees. The rider was large, too, but not freakishly so, dressed in armor that looked a bit like polished tortoiseshell, gray and brown blue. A sword dangled at the newcomer's side. Under his arm he carried a helmet in the shape of an animal's skull, some unrecognizable creature with long fangs. But it was his face that was the strangest part. For a moment, Chert thought the tall rider was wearing a mask of ivory, for other than the ruby-red eyes beneath the pale brow, the stranger had no face, only a slight vertical ridge where a nose might be, and a smooth expanse of white down to the chin. It was only when he caught a glimpse of the white neck working beneath that chin as the stranger looked Gil up and down that Chert was convinced once and for all that the stranger was not wearing a mask, but his own actual flesh. "His name is Gair the Storm Lantern," Gil announced suddenly. "He says we are to follow him." Chert laughed, a broken sound even to his own ears. If he had not gone mad, then Gil had, or the world had. "Says? He has no mouth. He speaks. Perhaps it is only that I feel his words inside me. Do you not hear him?" "No." Chert was weary, as exhausted as if seeping minerals had soaked his bones and changed them to heavy rock. When the faceless rider turned back toward the city, and the guards prodded Chert with their spears, he marched ahead of them. But despite the sharp pikes at his back, he did not have the will or the strength to move swiftly. The square of 3 gods had been draped all around with dark-colored cloths, so that even in the light of many torches, the buildings hid behind veils of shadow. She was waiting for them in a chair before the temple steps, a plain, high-backed chair out of some merchant's house that she invested with the terrible dignity of a throne. She was as tall as Gair, but both more and less ordinary to look at. She was beautiful in a weird, drawn-out way, the planes of her brown face and her bright eyes just a bit beyond human from most angles. Then, when she cocked her head to listen to some sound Chert could not hear, or to look over the square, surveying her legions who sat patiently on the ground, she abruptly seemed too extreme to pass for a person even at a distance, like something seen through deep water or thick, clear crystal. She was dressed, as for war, in a suit of black plate armor, covered almost everywhere, most heavily on the back and shoulders, with shockingly long spines, so that from a distance it was hard to make out her shape at all. Now that he was kneeling before her, it was clear to Chert that she had 2 arms and 2 legs and a slender, womanly figure. But even when he finally gathered the courage to look up at her, it was hard to look very long. There was something in her, some blunt, terrifying power that pushed his eyes away after only a few moments. Yasames, Gil had called her, as he made a sleepwalker's obeisance. His one-time mistress, he had said before. He had not spoken to her again since he knelt and saluted her, nor she to him. The tall woman with the thickly coiling black hair now lifted a gauntleted hand and said something in the unfamiliar tongue, her voice deep as a man's, but with its own slow music. Chert felt all the hairs on his neck rise at once. "This is all a nightmare. A part of him shrilled, trying to explain what could not be. But that part was buried deep, and he could barely hear it. A nightmare! You will wake up soon! She wants the mirror, Gil said, getting to his feet. The idea of resisting never even occurred to him. Chert fumbled out the circle of bone and silvered crystal, held it out. The woman did not take it from him. Instead, Gil plucked it from Chert's palm and passed it to her with another bow. She held it up to catch the torchlight, and for a moment the Thunderling thought he saw a look of anger, or something much like it, flick across her spare, stony face. She spoke again, a long disquisition of clicks and murmurs. She says she will honor her part of the pact and send the glass to Kulnakwar, and that for the moment there will be no more killing of mortals unless the people are forced to defend themselves. Gil listened as she spoke again. Then he replied, more swiftly and ably now, in that same tongue. She speaks to me as though I am the king himself, Gil said quietly to Chert. She says that by the success of this deed, I have won a short truce for the mortals. I told her that the king speaks through me, but only from a distance, that I am not him. King? Distance? Chert had not the slightest idea what any of this signified. The oppressive strangeness was so thick it made him want to weep. But there was also some stubborn thing in him, like the rock that was in his people's names and hearts, a residue of spirit that did not want to show fear before these beautiful, savage creatures. The woman Yasamez extended her arm, the mirror in her long, long fingers. The faceless creature, called Gair, the storm lantern, strode forward and took it from her. No words were exchanged, at least none that Chert could hear. Gair made a bow as he put it into the purse at his waist, then drew his fingers across his eyes in a ritual manner before mounting his great gray horse. She bids him take it swiftly and carefully to the blind one in Kulnakwar, Gil explained, as though he could understand silent commands as well as spoken ones. She says if anything happens to the queen in the glass, then she, the Samaz, will make all the earth weep blood. Chert only shook his head. He was having trouble paying attention to any of what was happening now. It was all too much. Gair swung up into the saddle and jabbed at the horse's flanks with his spurs. The beast's hooves dug into the earth of the temple square, and then rider and mount sped off, vanishing from sight so quickly that they might have been marionettes suddenly yanked from the stage. After a long silence, the woman, or goddess, or female monster Yasamas spoke aloud again, her voice buzzing like a hummingbird's wings just inches from Chert's ear. Gil listened silently. The woman looked from him to the Thunderling. Her eyes seemed to glow before Chert's reluctant gaze, like twin candle flames in a dark cave, and he had to look away before he was drawn into that empty cavern and lost forever. Then Chert's companion finally spoke. I am to stay. Gil sounded neither happy nor sad, but there was something dead in his voice that had been fractionally more lively before. You are to go, since there is truce. Truce? Chert finally located his own voice. What does that mean? It does not matter. Gil shook his head. You mortals did not cause the truce, and you cannot change it, but the place called Southmarch will be unharmed. He paused as Yasama said something stiff and harsh in her own tongue. For a little while, Gil clarified. And then, almost before he knew it, Chert was snatched up by rough hands and set on the saddle of a horse, and within moments, Market Road and the city began to fly past him on either side. He never saw the armored rider behind him, only the arms stretching past him on either side that held the reins. Like the orphan in the big folks' most beloved story, he dared not even look back until he was dropped unceremoniously on the beach beside the caves. Chert knew he should try to remember everything. He knew it was all important somehow. After all, his son had given everything but his life for that mirror, in whatever bargain it might signify. But at the moment, all he could imagine doing was crawling down into the nearest tunnel to sleep a little while, so he would have the strength to stagger home to Thunder in the town. Bryony led Chavin through the covered walk and out into the open flagstone courtyard in front of the Tower of Spring. The two guards leaning against the great outer door straightened up in wide-eyed surprise when they saw her. She was too annoyed by this errand and how it forced her to wait before learning Chavin's news, to remember to wish this new pair of guards the tidings of the season. But she remembered on the stairs and promised herself she would make amends on the way out. They mounted to the door of Anissa's residence and knocked. A long time passed before the door opened a little way. An eye and a sliver of face peered out. "Who is there?" Bryony made an impatient sound. "The Princess Regent? Am I allowed to come in?" Anissa's maid Celia opened the door and stepped back. Bryony strode into the residence. Her two guards, after a quick survey of the room, took up stations outside the door. Celia looked at the princess from beneath her eyelashes as though ashamed to have kept her out even for a moment. But when she saw Chavin, her eyes grew wide with surprise. "He was certainly a surprise to me," Bryony thought. "I suppose it's been just as long since they've seen him here either. I've come, as invited, to have a winter's eve drink with my stepmother," she told the young woman. "She is over there." Celia's Devonesian accent was a little stronger than Bryony remembered, as though being caught off guard made it harder for the young woman to speak well. The room was dark, except for low flames in the fireplace and a few candles, and none of the usual crowd of serving women, or even the midwife, appeared to be present. Bryony walked to the bed and pulled back the curtains. Her stepmother was sleeping, with her mouth open and her hands curled protectively across her belly. Bryony gently rubbed her shoulder. "Anissa, it's me, Bryony. I've come to have a drink with you and wish you a good Orphan's Day." Anissa's eyes fluttered open, but for a moment they didn't seem to take in much of anything. Then they found her stepdaughter and widened the way Celia's had when she saw Chavin. "Bryony, what are you doing here? Is Barrick with you?" "No, Anissa," she said gently. "He is gone with the Earl of Blueshore and the others. Don't you remember?" The small woman tried to sit up, groaned, then got her elbows planted in the cushions, and finally managed to lever herself upright. "Yes, of course, I am still sleepy. This child, it makes me sleep all the time." She looked Bryony up and down, frowned. "But what brings you here, dear girl?" "You invited me? It's Winter's Eve. Don't you remember?" "Did I?" She looked around the room. "Where are Isolda and the others? Celia, why are they not here?" "You sent them away, mistress. You are still full of sleep, that is all, and you forget." But now Anissa noticed Chavin, and again she showed surprise. "Doctor? Ah, is it truly you?" Why are you here? Is something wrong with the child? He joined Bryony by the bedside. No, I don't believe so, he said, with little of his usual good humor. Anissa detected this, and her face tightened. What? What is wrong? You must tell me. I shall, said Chayvan, if the Princess Regent will allow me a moment's indulgence. But first I think she should call in the guards. Guards? Anissa struggled hard to get out of bed now, her skin pale, voice increasingly shrill. Why, guards? What is going on? Tell me, I am the king's wife. Bryony was completely bewildered, but allowed Chayvan to move to the door and invite in young Milward and his stubbled comrade, both of whom looked more nervous to be in the queen's bedroom than if they had faced an armed foe. Celia moved to where her mistress now sat on the edge of the bed, the queen's pale little feet dangling down without quite reaching the floor. The maid put a protective arm around Anissa's shoulders and looked defiantly back at Chayvan. You are giving fright to me, the queen said, her accent thicker now, too. Bryony, what are you doing here? Why are you treating me so? Bryony didn't answer her stepmother, but couldn't help wondering if she had been too quick to let Chayvan have his way. Perhaps he had disappeared because he was deranged. She caught young Milward's eye and did her best to hold it for a moment, trying to let the guardsman know to watch her, not the physician, while waiting to be told what to do. If you are innocent, madam, I will beg your pardon most devoutly, and in no case will I harm you or your unborn child. I wish only to show you something. Chayvan put his hand into his pocket and produced a grayish object about the length of a child's thumb. Now that he had moved into the light, Bryony noticed for the first time that the physician's clothes were ragged and dirty. She felt another stab of doubt. Chayvan held out the stone, and both Anissa and her maid Celia shrank back as though it were the head of a poisonous serpent. What is it? Anissa pleaded. That is indeed the question, said Chayvan, a question I have worked hard to answer. It has taken me to some strange places and to some strange folk in recent days, but I think I know. In the south, it is called a kulikos. It is a kind of magical stone most often found on the southern continent, but they occasionally make their way north to Ion, to the sorrow of many. Don't touch me with it, Anissa shrieked, and although Bryony was puzzled by what the physician was doing, she could not help feeling that her stepmother was reacting too strongly. Chayvan looked at Anissa sternly. Ah, you know of such things, I see. But if you have done nothing wrong, madam, you have nothing to fear. You are trying to bring a curse for my baby, the king's child. What is the point of this, Chayvan? Bryony demanded. She is about to give birth, after all. Why are you frightening her? He nodded. I will tell you, Bryony. Highness, one of the workers on your brother's tomb brought this stone to me because he thought it strange. I thought little of it at the time, I must sadly admit, but there have been many things on my mind since Kendrick's death. I know I am not the only one. Bryony glanced at the two women huddled on the edge of the bed. The chamber felt odd, as though a storm hung just above them, making the air prickle. Go on, get to the point. Something about this troubled me. No, and I began to wonder if it might be one of a certain class of objects mentioned in some of my older books. I discovered that the place it had been found was in a direct line between the outside window of a room near Kendrick's chambers and the Tower of Spring. the tower in which we now find ourselves, a building almost completely given over to the residence of the king's wife and her household. He's talking in madness, Anissa moaned. Make him stop, Bryony. I am getting so frightened. The physician looked to her, but Bryony's heart was beating faster now, and she wanted to hear the rest. The windows of those chambers are all high above the ground, she reminded them. Brone searched them all. There was no rope left behind. Yes? The room was warm. Chavin was perspiring, his forehead glinting with sweat in the candlelight. Which makes it all the stranger that I should find the mark of something having landed in the loose soil at the edge of the garden beneath the window. The marks were deep, so that even though many days had passed, they had not disappeared. Bryony stared at him. Wait a moment, Chavin. Are you suggesting that Anissa, a woman carrying a child, the king's child, jumped out of the upstairs window all the way to the edge of the garden? That she somehow killed Kendrick and his guards, then jumped down and escaped? She took a breath, held out a hand as she prepared to have the guards arrest him. That is truly madness. Yes, make him go away, Anissa wailed. Bryony, save me. He's frightening my mistress, the queen, cried Celia. Why don't the guards stop him? It is certainly much like madness to believe such a thing, Highness, Chavin agreed. He seemed very calm for a lunatic. That is why I think you should hear all my tale before you try to understand. You see, I knew I could not make anyone believe a tale like that. I did not really believe it myself. But I was frightened and intrigued by what I had learned about Kulikos stones. I decided I must know more. I went in search of knowledge and eventually found it, although the price was high. He paused and wiped at his forehead with his tattered sleeve. Very high. But what I learned is that in the south of Ion, they believe a Kulikos stone summons a terrible spirit. So powerful is this ancient dark sorcery, so dreadful that in many places even possessing one of these stones will earn the bearer death on the instant. Listening to such words by flickering candlelight, Bryony felt as though she were in some story, not a tale of heroism and heavenly reward, like the one Puzzle had just sung at the feast, but something far older and more grim. Why do you say all this foolishness to my mistress when she is not well? Demanded Celia in a shrill voice. Even if someone has done some bad thing and then run past the tower where she lives, what is that to us? Why do you say that to her? The guards standing by the door were murmuring to each other now, confused and a little fearful. Bryony knew she couldn't let it all go on, not for much longer. State your case, Chavin, she ordered. Very well, he said. I have learned that there is something interesting about the murderous Kulikos spirit. It is female, always female. When it is summoned, it will only inhabit the bodies of women. Madness! Cried Anissa. And it is particularly a favorite weapon among the witches of Zan and of the southernmost lands of Ion, lands like Devonis. Anissa turned to her stepdaughter, holding out her hands. Bryony couldn't help shrinking back just a little. Why do you let him say this to me, Bryony? Have I not always been kind to you? Because I am from Devonis, I am a witch. It is easy enough to discover, Chavin said loudly. He thrust the small gray object closer to the king's wife. Here is the stone. Look at it. It was tossed aside by the one who employed it to murder the Prince Regent after she had used it up. But doubtless a little of those dark magics still remain. Touch it, my lady, and if you have anything to hide, the stone will show that. He extended his hand, bringing the stone close to her bare arm. Anissa tried to squirm away from it as though it were a hot coal, but couldn't disentangle herself from the protective embrace of her maid, Celia. And that's where I'm going to stop. Because, well, things are going to happen soon, and I don't want to have to read for 5 minutes before stopping, since it's already almost 8 o'clock. So, I don't know where. Oh, I know what that voice is. That's the voice of the Marvin the Martian guy, or whatever his name is, from the old Bugs Bunny cartoons. The uranium B-52 space modulator. Also kind of in the Grover, etc., Jim Henson voice range as well. Kermit the Frog and stuff like that. Anyway, that's where I'm going to stop. So, perforce, that is where you are going to stop, unless you're going to run out, get the book, and read it to yourself. Otherwise, you'll have to wait until next Sunday at 2 a.m., at which point I will be finishing that scene, and then again I'll be reading at 7 p.m. Meanwhile, just want to thank you all, as always, for joining me and for sparing me from the humiliation of being a guy who sits by himself at his desk reading to nobody. And yeah, just to encourage you all to take good care of yourselves, take good care of those around you, your loved ones, and your nearbys, and just continue being the good people that you are. That is a value to the world right there. And I will see you next Sunday. Yeah, next Sunday, 2 a.m. in the morning, my time, whatever time that may be for those of you out there. And a lot of you I will see then on Sunday at 7 p.m., also my time, and whatever time that might be for you. So, with that, fare thee well, my own true loves, and I will